When my long-term relationship ended, I expected heartbreak, but I never expected to also lose my best friend, Buddy, in the process. Buddy is my golden retriever mix, a dog I raised from a puppy. After the breakup, my ex moved out quickly. I thought we had an understanding that Buddy would stay with me since I was the one who cared for him day in and day out. But just weeks later, I was stunned to discover that my ex's new girlfriend refused to return my dog after a short visit. One moment, I was looking at photos of Buddy on my phone, missing him. The next, I was in a battle to prove that he belonged with me. I never imagined I'd have to fight for custody of a pet, but there I was, calling the police, collecting evidence, preparing for court, and crying into Buddy's empty bed at night. What should have been a simple request, "Please give me back my dog," turned into a drawn-out nightmare. I want to share how it all happened, how I coped with Buddy's absence, and what I did to finally bring him home. From the day Buddy was taken from me, my home felt unbearably empty. The first morning I woke up without him, I felt more alone than ever. There was no excited bark at the bedroom door or no wet nose nudging me awake for breakfast. I shuffled into the kitchen and nearly set out 2 bowls, one with cereal for me and an empty one for Buddy, before reality hit me like a punch in the gut. Every part of my daily routine held a reminder of Buddy's absence. At 7 a.m. sharp, I would normally clip on his leash for a brisk walk around the block. Now I found myself standing at the front door, leash in hand, with nowhere to go. Without the jingle of Buddy's tags or the thump of his tail, the silence in my apartment felt oppressive. I ended up walking alone, hoping maybe by some miracle I'd see a flash of golden fur rounding the corner, Buddy pulling my ex along on the leash, coming home. It never happened. Small things in the house would trigger an emotional reaction. I found one of his chew toys under the couch, and tears welled up before I could even pick it up. I broke down one night and slept holding his favorite toy, clinging to it because it still smelled like him. The couch cushion where he loved to nap was still slightly indented in his shape. I often caught myself glancing at it, half expecting to see Buddy's sleepy eyes looking back at me. Flashbacks of Buddy's puppyhood hit me at the most unexpected moments. One afternoon, I was sorting laundry and found an old towel with faint chew marks at the corner, a casualty of Buddy's teething phase. I remembered the day I brought him home at 8 weeks old, how he had climbed into my lap and fallen asleep, and how I promised I'd always take care of him. The thought that I had somehow broken that promise by letting him be taken crushed me. Guilt and grief became my constant companions during those weeks. Nights were the hardest. Buddy used to curl up at the foot of my bed, or sometimes even wedge himself next to me like a little spoon. Now the bed felt vast and cold. I'd wake up at 2 a.m. reaching down to pet him, only to grasp empty air. I started leaving a dim light on in the living room because coming home to a dark, dogless house after work was too depressing. Instead of Buddy's wagging tail at the door, I was greeted only by silence. I was withdrawing, skipping social events, struggling to focus at work. I confided in a close friend about what happened, and even saying the words aloud felt surreal. My ex's new girlfriend is keeping my dog and won't give him back. The shock on my friend's face mirrored my own disbelief and anger. How could anyone justify keeping someone else's dog? Buddy wasn't a piece of furniture or a shared DVD collection. He was practically my child. Through tears and clenched teeth, I resolved that I would do whatever it took to get him back. Once the initial shock wore off, I knew I had to take action. I tried reasoning with my ex first, hoping maybe he would listen to common sense. When I called him, He sounded apologetic but helpless. It was clear his new girlfriend was the one pulling the strings. She got on the phone at one point and bluntly said, "We're not giving Buddy back. He's ours now." Hearing a stranger refer to my dog as her own made my blood boil. I tried to stay calm and explained that Buddy had been mine long before she came along. She didn't care. We argued back and forth, my voice shaking with anger and hers icy firm, until she hung up on me. Next, I attempted a more diplomatic approach via text and email, hoping if I put things in writing, it might persuade them. I wrote a heartfelt email explaining how much Buddy meant to me and offering to discuss a visitation arrangement if they truly cared about him. I even attached photos of Buddy and me from over the years. Him dressed in a tiny coat on his first winter walk, him licking my face when I came home from work, the two of us snuggled on the couch. I wanted them to see that Buddy belonged with me, that he would be heartbroken too, not just me. I was effectively begging for my own dog back, appealing to their empathy. The response I got was silence. No response at all. They ignored my messages entirely. As days passed with no progress, I realized I needed to prepare for a legal battle. I spent my evenings doing frantic online research. I searched for phrases like "X won't return my dog" and "pet custody dispute," and read everything I could find. I came across countless stories of people in similar situations. Some had happy endings, others not so much. One thing became clear. The law tends to see pets as property, not as living family members. I learned something chilling. In the eyes of the law, Buddy was just property. That meant if I took this to court, a judge might treat it like any other property dispute. I read that in many cases, a court won't order a pet to be returned and might only award the monetary value of the dog as compensation. The thought made me feel physically ill. Buddy is priceless to me. A judge handing me a few $100s and calling it a day would be a nightmare scenario. I was terrified the judge would only award me the dog's value in cash, instead of returning Buddy to me. That fear lit a fire under me. If I was going to court, I needed to build the strongest case possible to show that Buddy was mine and should be returned. My research turned into a checklist of evidence and steps. On one legal advice site, I found a list of proof of ownership examples to gather. I realized I had most of them. Adoption papers. I dug out Buddy's adoption contract from the shelter, which fortunately had my signature and name on it. Veterinary records. I called Buddy's vet clinic and asked for copies of all his medical records. Every visit, every vaccination was under my name. Microchip registration. Buddy wasn't microchipped at the time, but I did have his city dog license registered to me. I included that paperwork. Photographic evidence. I printed out dozens of photos of Buddy and me, spanning from his puppy days until just before he was taken. We looked happy in every single one, evidence of the life we shared. Bills and receipts. I gathered receipts for Buddy's food, toys, grooming, and the credit card statements showing I paid for all of it. I placed all these documents in a binder, neatly organized with labels and dates. The stack of evidence was both heartbreaking and heartening. Heartbreaking because each item reminded me of happier times. Heartening because it painted a clear picture that I had been Buddy's primary and sole caretaker. I even saved screenshots of old text messages where my ex had referred to Buddy as your dog. For example, an old text, "Can you pick up your dog from daycare today?" According to another tip I found, written admissions like that from the other person can be a golden ticket in court. Beyond evidence, I also prepared myself mentally. I read up on the process of filing a claim in small claims court for property. It was all new to me, but I learned the basics. I'd file a complaint stating who I am, explain the nature of my claim, and state what I was asking the court to do, the return of my dog. I would pay the filing fee, file the claim, then have it served to my ex and his girlfriend, and we'd get a hearing date before a judge. It sounded straightforward on paper, but I was anxious about doing it right. I couldn't afford a lawyer, and in small claims, you often don't even use one, so it was all on me. Late one night, surrounded by printouts and legal notes, I also stumbled on advice about involving the police. Up until then, I hadn't called the police because I assumed they'd consider it a domestic issue. But I read that I should report my dog as stolen if someone refused to return him. After all, the law sees a dog much like it sees a necklace or a shovel, as property that can indeed be stolen. That realization made me both sad and determined. If the system only saw Buddy as property, fine. I'd use those rules to my advantage. The next day, I went to the local police station with all the proof I had and filed a police report for a stolen dog, explaining the situation to an officer, that my ex's new girlfriend literally wouldn't give me back my own pet was a bit humiliating, but the officer was surprisingly understanding. He took down the details and said he'd make a call to my ex. Hearing the police refer to Buddy as stolen property was surreal, but at least it meant my complaint was on record. As expected, the police couldn't do much beyond making a phone call. My ex told the officer that he believed the dog was shared property and the new girlfriend claimed I had abandoned Buddy, a ridiculous lie. The officer informed them that this was a civil matter for the courts to decide, and told me I might have to sue to get Buddy back. Still, having that police report gave me one more piece of paper in my growing stack of evidence. By this point, I had a clear plan. 1. File a lawsuit for the return of my dog, known legally as a replevin or property recovery action in small claims. 2. Show up with overwhelming evidence that Buddy was mine. 3. Explain my story to the judge calmly and convincingly. 4. Get Buddy back. Despite my fear, I also felt a grim resolve. Each piece of research and each document I gathered made me feel a bit more in control. Instead of wallowing in sorrow every day, I channeled my pain into preparation. I was still devastated, but now I had a mission: bring Buddy home. Part of that preparation was psychological. I knew I'd only have a short window in front of a judge to state my case, so I actually rehearsed it. I mentally rehearsed my day in court over and over, determined to fight for Buddy. I'd pace in my living room, talking to an imaginary judge, presenting the timeline of how I got Buddy, how I cared for him, and how he ended up in the clutches of my ex's girlfriend. I anticipated their possible arguments too. Maybe they'd claim I had given Buddy to my ex, which was not true at all, or that he was happier with them. Definitely not true, considering I knew my ex barely even walked him. One sleepless night, I even practiced out loud, pretending I was on the witness stand. My coffee table stood in as the judge's bench. I laid out all my evidence exhibits on it. I imagined myself standing before the judge, voice trembling but resolute, telling the whole story of why Buddy needed to come back to me. In this imagined speech, I said everything I felt. Your Honor, I got Buddy as a rescue when he was a tiny puppy. I have been his dad for 4 years. I have the papers here showing I adopted him and paid for all his care. My ex was my partner at the time, but he was never Buddy's primary caregiver. I was. I fed Buddy, walked him every day, took him to the vet, trained him, and loved him. Buddy slept in my bed, rode in my car, and lived in my home. He doesn't just belong with me, he is family to me. I understand the law might view Buddy as property, but to me, he's like a son. I would do anything for him. When my ex left, there was no question that Buddy stayed with me because that was his home. My ex's new girlfriend has no right to keep Buddy. She's a stranger who has known him for a matter of weeks. I've been Buddy's person his whole life. Taking him from me is not only cruel to me, but it's cruel to Buddy. I'm asking the court to please see that Buddy's rightful place is with the person who has loved and cared for him all along. I found myself choking up as I recited these words to my empty living room. At one point, I had to stop and wipe my eyes, imagining how scared and confused Buddy must have been by all this. Still, practicing my speech made me feel more prepared. If it actually came to standing in front of a judge, I wanted to be ready to make the most important plea of my life. In building my case, I also reached out to people who could vouch for my relationship with Buddy. My best witness turned out to be my next-door neighbor, Alice. Alice is a retiree who spent a lot of time tending her flower garden in the mornings, the same time I used to walk Buddy each day. When I told her what was happening, she was aghast. "Poor Buddy must be wondering where you are," she said, shaking her head. Without hesitation, Alice offered to speak on my behalf if needed. We sat at her kitchen table one afternoon with a pot of tea while I gathered her recollections. She chuckled as she recounted, "Every morning, like clockwork, I'd see you too. Buddy would practically drag you over to my yard so he could get his treat." It was true. Alice often kept dog biscuits in her apron pocket for Buddy. He adored her, and she adored him. I've seen a lot of dogs in my day, and let me tell you, that dog only has eyes for you. I remember how he'd whine if you stopped to chat too long. He'd nudge your leg as if to say, "Come on, let's keep going, Dad." Hearing those memories both warmed and broke my heart. I worried that by now, Buddy might be bonding with someone else. I voiced this fear to Alice, and she waved it off firmly. "Dogs don't forget their people. He knows you're his dad," she said. Alice agreed to write a short statement describing how often she saw Buddy with me and how well cared for he was. She even noted that when my ex lived with me, she rarely saw him walking Buddy. It was almost always me alone with the dog. Her statement ended with a line that brought tears to my eyes. "I can attest that Buddy and my name have a very special bond. Anyone who has observed them together can see that Buddy considers him his person." Reading that, I felt a surge of hope and validation. Another neighbor, Miguel from across the hall, also volunteered to back me up. Miguel often dog-sat Buddy on short notice if I had to work late. He recounted how Buddy would sit by the door about 10 minutes before my usual arrival time, ears perked, waiting for the sound of my footsteps in the hall. "That dog can practically tell time when it comes to you," Miguel wrote in a statement. He described how excited Buddy would get when I finally came home, wiggling, whining happily, practically dancing on his hind legs. Miguel's perspective was great because he could describe how Buddy behaved when I wasn't around, which still showed how deeply Buddy was attached to me. I ended up with a couple of signed statements from these folks to support me if it came to that. Logistically, small claims court in our area wouldn't normally have live witness testimony, usually just written statements, but I felt better knowing I had these in my pocket. It wasn't just me who knew Buddy was mine. My whole neighborhood knew it too. Collecting these witness accounts was an emotional process. On one hand, hearing others talk about me and Buddy underscored how absurd it was that anyone would think he belonged with someone else. On the other hand, reading those kind words about our bond would often send me into a fresh wave of tears at night, missing him terribly. Still, it reinforced my resolve. I wasn't fighting this battle alone. I had a community behind me, and even more importantly, I had the truth on my side. Alice gave me one more boost of confidence as I left her house that day. She clasped my hand and said, "Bring that sweet boy home. We're all rooting for you." For the first time in a while, I smiled a genuine smile. I promised her I would. The court date was set about 6 weeks after I filed my complaint. Those weeks crawled by. Each day without Buddy felt like a small eternity, but at least I knew a resolution was in sight. I spent the night before the hearing going over my carefully prepared binder a dozen times. I didn't sleep much. My mind kept rehearsing my opening statement, the order of my evidence, even how I would respond if the judge asked certain questions. When the day finally arrived, I was equal parts nervous and determined. I dressed up in a tidy suit and tie, wanting to make a good impression. I remember standing in front of the mirror, straightening that tie, and taking a deep breath. "This is for you, Buddy," I whispered, imagining my dog's big brown eyes. At the courthouse, my heart pounded in my chest. I had never been in a courtroom for any reason, so everything from the security check to finding the right room felt intimidating. I clutched my binder of evidence like a lifeline. When I walked into the small claims courtroom, I immediately spotted my ex and his new girlfriend on the other side of the room. My ex looked uncomfortable, even a bit sheepish. The new girlfriend, however, met my gaze with a hard glare. Seeing her sent a jolt of anger through me. This was the person who had caused so much grief. But I also noticed she was holding a leash in her hand, coiled up with no dog on the end. My heart skipped. Did they actually bring Buddy here? They hadn't, thankfully. I'd have hated for Buddy to be in that tense environment. But the leash in her hand told me they at least wanted to look like responsible dog owners, or perhaps they thought they might have to turn him over. We checked in with the clerk. The judge had a few cases ahead of ours, so we sat waiting on stiff wooden benches. I tried not to look at them, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw the new girlfriend whispering sharply to my ex. He stared at the floor, barely responding. I suspect he hadn't wanted things to get this far. Perhaps he never imagined I'd actually go through with a lawsuit. But here we were. As I sat there, I reopened my binder one last time, flipping through the pages of evidence and the bullet point notes I had prepared. My hands were trembling, so I took a few slow breaths. This was it. All my preparation, all my longing to see Buddy again, led to this day in court. I glanced behind me and saw Alice sitting in the back of the courtroom gallery. She had shown up just in case to support me, even though she probably wouldn't be called to speak. I gave her a grateful, nervous smile. Finally, our case was called. I stood up, palms sweaty but ready. Before we could even approach the bench, the judge, noticing this was a dispute over a dog, suggested we step outside to see if we could reach an agreement before proceeding formally. Courts often encourage parties to settle in hallway discussions, especially in emotional cases like pet disputes. A volunteer mediator met us in the hallway to facilitate a last-minute discussion. At first, the new girlfriend was as stubborn as ever. She insisted to the mediator that she and my ex considered Buddy their dog now. She trotted out a story about how I had allowed them to take Buddy, and now the dog was attached to them. I countered firmly that this was not true. I had allowed only a short visit in good faith, which they exploited. I showed the mediator my adoption papers and vet records. They had nothing comparable, and I even had witnesses ready to attest that Buddy had always been with me. I watched the new girlfriend's defiant expression falter. My ex shifted nervously. I then made my final offer. I stated that if Buddy was returned to me immediately, I'd be willing to drop the case without pursuing anything further. I made it clear I wasn't after money or revenge, I just wanted my dog back. However, if we went before the judge, I intended to ask not only for an order to return Buddy, but also for court costs and any other remedy available. My tone was polite, but firm, and the implication was obvious. If we walked into that courtroom, they were going to lose. My ex finally spoke up, directing his words to his girlfriend gently. He does have all the papers. Maybe we should just do what he's asking. She looked furious at his suggestion, but he pressed on, likely realizing the inevitable. A drawn-out fight would only make them look worse, and he knew it. After a long silence, her defiant expression finally crumpled. She muttered, "Fine." My heart leapt. Did I hear that right? The mediator quickly confirmed, "So you're agreeing to return the dog to me and settle this matter today." The new girlfriend gave a curt nod, not making eye contact with me. My ex let out a breath and added, "We'll bring Buddy to him today." I couldn't help it. Tears of relief sprang to my eyes. I blinked them away and nodded, trying to remain composed. We signed a short handwritten agreement stating that I would drop the lawsuit in exchange for Buddy's immediate return. We settled the case mere minutes before we would have gone before the judge. In the end, I never had to deliver my passionate speech to the judge, but I was ready to if it had come to that. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. Alice gave me a big hug and said she was proud of me for standing up for what was right. I thanked her profusely for being there. We parted ways so I could arrange the handoff with my ex. He and I agreed I'd come by his apartment that afternoon to pick up Buddy. I asked that same close friend to accompany me. I was too anxious and excited to go alone, and just in case there was any lingering drama, I wanted backup. That afternoon, I drove over to my ex's place with my friend in the passenger seat for moral support. I was practically vibrating with anticipation and nerves. Would Buddy be okay? Would he remember me after all these weeks apart? My friend kept assuring me, "He's going to freak out when he sees you, in a good way." We pulled up to the address, and there they were waiting outside. My ex and his new girlfriend with Buddy on a leash. I barely got the car in park before I jumped out and called, "Buddy!" At the sound of my voice, Buddy's head snapped up. In that instant, I saw his ears perk and his tail explode into a wag. He yanked the leash right out of the new girlfriend's hand and bolted straight toward me. The moment Buddy saw me again, he leapt into my arms, whining with joy. He was wiggling his entire body, trying to lick my face and pressing against me so hard I nearly fell over. I was laughing and crying all at once. "Hey, Buddy, hey, it's okay. I'm here. I missed you so much," I kept saying into his fur. It was one of the happiest moments of my life, feeling his warmth and energy again after so long. Out the corner of my eye, I could see my ex looking somewhat emotional, and the girlfriend standing off to the side with a sour expression. I didn't care about either of them at that moment. All I cared about was that Buddy was back in my arms where he belonged. Buddy pressed against my leg while my ex and I exchanged a few brief words. I thanked him for ultimately doing the right thing. The new girlfriend said nothing. She refused to even meet my eyes. We left quickly. Buddy practically hopped into my car as if he knew he was finally going home. As we drove off, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Buddy sitting in the back seat, nose out the window, tail thumping against the cushion. My friend nudged me, grinning, and I realized I was smiling wider than I had in months. Back at home, Buddy raced from room to room, sniffing all his familiar spots to make sure everything was as he remembered. I let him explore. I had cleaned the apartment in preparation, put out fresh water and food, even laid a new blanket in his favorite corner. He zoomed back to me from the bedroom with one of his toys in his mouth, the very same toy I had been clutching at night. I burst out laughing, kneeling down to hug him yet again. "Welcome home, Buddy," I whispered, scratching behind his ears as he groaned happily. It felt like my home and my heart filled up again in an instant. Over the next few days, I noticed Buddy sticking extra close to me. If I got up to go to the kitchen, he followed. If I went into the bathroom, he'd sit right outside the door. At night, he curled up so close against me that I could feel his heartbeat. Neither of us wanted to let the other out of sight. I became extra cautious, changing up our walk times and routes, double-checking all the doors, even getting the locks changed since my ex once had a key. I also cut off all remaining contact with my ex. I blocked him and his girlfriend on every platform and told mutual friends not to share any information about me or Buddy. I wanted absolutely no contact going forward. Buddy's emotional readjustment took a little time, but love and routine worked wonders. Soon, he seemed to understand that this was permanent. He was home for good. His old playful spark returned. He'd bring me toys to initiate fetch, roll over for belly rubs, and do his happy prance at mealtime. I made some promises to him and to myself. I promised Buddy he would never be away from me like that again, and I vowed to put every precaution in place so that if anyone ever tried to challenge his ownership again, I'd be more than ready. One of the first things I did after his return was schedule a vet appointment to get Buddy microchipped under my name and to update all his records. I also renewed his city dog license and made sure it listed me as the sole owner. These might sound like small bureaucratic steps, but I learned the hard way how crucial they can be. If I can leave you with anything from this story, let it be this. Always license and microchip your dog and keep vet records in your name. They help prove ownership if there's ever a dispute.
Stay safe.